Good evening. Happy Friday. I don't often review anti-auditor videos, not because they're not wrong, not because they don't misstate the law, not because they don't deserve to be mocked, but because, much like James Freeman videos, they're formulaic, and criticizing them, they're all basically the same. They all basically succumb to the same criticisms. So it's just not very rewarding, intellectually speaking, to break down these and tell you how they're wrong, because they're all basically wrong for the same reasons. And there's other little nitpicky things that I could do, like I could point out that there's 3 links. I think this is for monetization. Well, there's the Patreon, there's PayPal, there's TubeBuddy, I don't know what the hell that is. Teespring store, there's join the channel to get access to perks. It definitely has links to make money, and it's a monetized video. And he doesn't have links to the original work. Now, I think a lot of these anti-auditor videos where they play a large chunk of the auditor's video, I think they it's a kind of a moral judgment on my part, but I think they do kind of steal money from the auditors, especially when they don't put a link to the auditor's work, the original work, in their description. And it's just it's just a shitty thing to do, I think. The auditor goes out there, risks their freedom to get this video footage, and posts it to make money. And then you take that work from the comfort of your couch or whatever, and you put the relevant chunks in there, along with a few spicy herder, dumb, frauditor, dumb, herder, and think that somehow justifies you making money off their work. I don't know. I don't like it very much. And I also kind of think that it robs from the viewer, because the viewer might want to get the full context of the auditor's video to see what you chopped out, to see what you maybe manipulated to make the auditor look bad. Like, say, for example, the auditor doesn't get arrested for something that you say is illegal. That might be something the viewer would want to know. Anyway, let's jump in. Let's get stuck in, as the English like to say. So this guy's saying it's not authorized. He appears to be a Customs and Border Patrol agent. Yeah, Customs. He's a Customs agent. He's saying that it's against policy. Auditing America says it's not illegal. And Auditing America, the police end up getting called in Auditing America's video. The police come and they don't arrest him. You can do the math for yourself. You tell me. But I'm sure Plothole's going to break it down for us. It's not illegal, it's not authorized. It's not illegal, it's not authorized. All right, here come the edumacations. I'm going to put this down to normal speed here, because he's gonna put some education in our stockings. So I want to make sure that everybody hears it clearly and understands it clearly. I'm sorry, what was that? I think he means International Society for Krishna Consciousness versus Lee, which sounds really a lot like Kirsten versus Lee. Sure. Okay. So in Kirsten versus Lee, in 1992. So where has plot hole gone wrong? Where has plot hole lost the proverbial plot? Well, first of all, he's relying on a 1992 case, and there are newer cases. A lot of people get myopic and they think, oh, I'm going to do Supreme Court cases, but you have to remember that Saipan is in the Ninth Circuit, and there are newer Supreme Court cases, and there are newer Ninth Circuit cases that you can look at that maybe you can get a little bit better clarity on this with. Another thing I would like to point out is that in International Society for Krishna Consciousness, this part right here, the court allowed a prohibition on solicitation, arguing that the airport terminal was not a public forum because its primary purpose was to facilitate air travel. But then there's this little nitpicky part here. This is a sister case. In Lee versus the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the Supreme Court ruled that banning the distribution of literature in airport terminals violates the First Amendment. So what's the difference, plot hole? What's the difference? Now, you said that a restriction is thus valid as long as it's reasonable. What does that mean? Can you explain to us what that means? Or are you just going to regurgitate a chunk of text from a Supreme Court case and think that that justifies your position? Well, the problem is we don't know what, if any, restriction these guys are talking about. Is there, in fact, a restriction on filming in this particular location? I don't know. You probably don't know. But let's assume, arguendo, that there is. So what is the current standard? This is a 2014 Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision. This is International Society for Krishna Consciousness Incorporated, ISKCON Inc., versus the City of Los Angeles. Believe it or not, this is another airport case. And they agreed that it was a non-public forum. And this is what the court said. In non-public fora, by contrast, restrictions on speech need survive only a much more limited review. Specifically, the challenged restriction must be reasonable in the light of the purpose served by the forum. Not just reasonable, but reasonable in the light, or in light of the purpose served by the forum. So there's another form of review. Well, we'll get through this, and then I'll kind of explain a little bit more. It also has to be viewpoint neutral. And I'll explain that, I guess, a little bit more too. The restriction need not be the most reasonable or the only reasonable limitation. It need only be reasonable. A restriction is reasonable, moreover, when it is wholly consistent with the government's legitimate interest in preserving the property for the use to which it is lawfully dedicated. The reasonableness inquiry we have noted is a deferential one. So the reasonableness standard is kind of the equivalent of the rational basis review standard of constitutional review. And the rational basis review is kind of a two-pronged test. The government has to have a legitimate interest in the regulation. They have to have a legitimate interest in regulating the speech. Like, we need to regulate the speech because of this legitimate interest. And then the regulation has to be rationally related to achieving that legitimate government interest. So it's kind of a two-part test there. In the general kind of rational basis review, the First Amendment one is a little different. But if you can grasp just the basic rational basis review, it'll kind of help you. So the government has to have a legitimate purpose, a legitimate need to restrict a constitutional right. And then they have to promulgate a rule that maybe isn't the most narrowly tailored or anything like that, but it has to be rationally related. That's why it's called a rational basis review. It has to be rationally related to achieving that legitimate government interest. So it's a pretty deferential standard. It just has to be legitimate. It doesn't have to be like overwhelming or like really important or anything like that. It just has to be legitimate, right? We don't want you chewing bubble gum because on this particular piece of government property because people tend to litter with it or something like that. That might be enough. That might be legitimate. And having a ban against having chewing gum in that area might be rationally related to achieving that legitimate government interest. The non-public forum basis of analysis is very similar to that. And so the restriction has to be, if it's reasonable, it has to be wholly consistent with the government's legitimate interest in preserving the property to the use to which it's lawfully dedicated. That's the kind of legitimate government interest. The legitimate government interest has to be in preserving the use of the property for its intended use. So if something isn't inconsistent with the use of the property, it's not reasonable. If it's not inconsistent with the use of the property, it's not reasonable. So let's take for example, taking pictures in the airport terminal. Let's say the government just didn't want anybody taking pictures of the planes coming and going from the airport terminal. Now, of course, you have to have your ticket to get into the airport terminal. So there's some screening there, but people have their cell phones, and people like to take their cell phones out and take pictures of the planes as they're coming in and out, take video of the planes as they're coming in and out. And the government might say, well, we don't want people taking pictures because people are going to stand around taking pictures, and we want to keep people moving, right? But is that interest, is it a legitimate interest in preserving the use of the airport as an airport to restrict people from taking pictures of the planes coming in and out? Probably not, right? Probably not. So just him saying that, oh, well, it's just a reasonableness standard, so it's automatically, ta-da, I win. It doesn't work that way. You actually have to, number one, you have to look at the regulation. You have to look at the intended use of the property. You have to see if there is a legitimate interest there in preserving that use. And you have to see if the rule, the regulation is designed to somehow achieve that. It doesn't have to be the best way of achieving it, but it has to be kind of targeted towards achieving it. It has to be rationally related to achieving it. That's what the test looks like. It's not just, it's a non-public forum, so it just has to be reasonable, so I win. Because we don't know. We don't know what the policy is. But is filming, I mean, there's a reason, like the TSA policy on recording. Look at that. So the TSA doesn't prohibit photographing, videotaping, or filming at security checkpoints as long as the security process or screening process is not interfered with or sensitive information is not revealed. And you really have to kind of F up to interfere. You've got to hold your recording device up to the face of a TSA officer so the officer is unable to see or move. That's pretty bold. That's pretty ballsy. You have to refuse to assume the proper stance during screening. So you can film as long as you assume the proper stance during screening. You can film as long as you don't block the movement of others through the checkpoint. You can film as long as you don't refuse to submit a recording device for screening. And these are also in airports. These are literally 100% in airports. So why saying, oh, it's an airport, ergo I win, why does that work? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And for a long time, there was a policy in place. This is Askins et al. Versus DHS. I've done a couple of videos on it. There was a policy in the Border Patrol checkpoints in California and Arizona. I'm pretty sure it's California and Arizona. San Ysidro and there's another place. There are two places where two different guys were popped for filming. One guy was completely outside of the Border Patrol checkpoint. The other guy was on an overpass that was within the Border Patrol checkpoint, but it was an overpass. It was like a pedestrian walkway. And they were both filming the Border Patrol operations. And the Border Patrol detained them, deleted their photos, searched their phone or their cameras, deleted their photos, and then they sued. And what happened? The Border Patrol came to a settlement agreement that basically said, let's see. So Border Patrol checkpoints are non-public forums. They had a policy against filming. And they got sued and they settled. The settlement is that the U.S. government officials cannot interfere with people's First Amendment rights to make and retain photographs, video recordings, or other recordings from publicly accessible areas at any land port entry to the United States, yada yada. Prohibits government officials from requiring members of the public to obtain prior authorization to record and document at the border, yada yada yada. Government officials can't unlawfully seize, delete, destroy, or otherwise inhibit anybody's photographs. Taking photographs, video recordings from publicly accessible areas is not unlawful, and the settlement does allow the U.S. government officials to restrict photography or other recordings in restricted access areas. That was the settlement. Now, that doesn't mean that this can't be further challenged. It's just that that's what the ACLU settled with the Border Patrol and Askins et al. Versus DHS. That doesn't mean it's necessarily the end of it. But you have to remember that when Askins and Ramirez, I think it was Ramirez, when Askins and Ramirez were arrested, it was one of them was in a non-public forum, 100% guaranteed. He was in a non-public forum. He was in a Border Patrol checkpoint. And yet they prevailed and they secured a pretty good win. And do you know why? You know why it got settled? Because the Border Patrol could have lost hard. They could have lost this little bit that they negotiated for. Because remember, it's not just it has to be reasonable. It has to be wholly consistent with the government's legitimate interest in preserving the property to the use for which it's lawfully dedicated. But please educate us some more. Well, I'm not really going to. This guy's going to act like a Karen, but the pothole's going to call Auditing America a Karen, even though Auditing America stays calm and doesn't end up getting arrested. And then Auditing America goes to a public park where It is public. It is open to the public. It is a public park. And he has the audacity to film. And people get upset with him filming. And threaten him with violence. And instead of condemning the people who are getting aggressive and threatening someone for the simple act of holding a camera and talking, not even saying anything bad or mean or anything like that, but instead of condemning the people who are willing to resort to violence over really inoffensive speech, and consider this. So Auditing America is holding a camera, right? He's holding a camera. These people get recorded all the time on cameras. Dash cams from cars. ATMs have video cameras in them. You get recorded every time you make a video, or every time you make a ATM transaction. Every time you go into the bank. Most stores have video surveillance cameras, internal and external. You're being recorded all the time. But it's just because because you can see someone holding it that all of a sudden you're going to get upset. I watch this and I don't understand. I don't understand why these guys got all upset to the point where they were threatening violence. And I certainly don't understand why Auditing America is a complete asshole for doing this. This guy right here, this older gentleman, waved him over. And it even gets pointed out in this video. See right here, you can see this guy wave him over. What? Right here, see him waving him over. He's waving him over. He's saying, come here and talk to me. Now, did Auditing America overstay his welcome? Sure, but it's a public park. These guys don't own the public park. Anyway, I'm rambling now. Anyway, there you go. That's a really shit anti-auditor video that misunderstands the law and only states half of it because, well, why the fuck should he say the entire law and actually do the analysis that's required, right? Thanks for watching. Have a great evening.